Yeah.
So I'm just looking at that clock. All right, so we're going to call to order the meeting, the regular meeting of the February 4th meeting of the Parks, Recreation, Intergenerational Services Commission. We're going to start today with the, it's 6 p.m., the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to say Commissioner Eckler is going to do that for us today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. A roll call, please. I am here.
Vice Chair Sandoval,
Present.
Commissioner Ahmad, Commissioner Eckler,
Present.
Commissioner Hargrove, Commissioner Jans,
Present.
Commissioner Reed,
Present.
and alternate member Horwitz. We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone wishing to address the commission on, should fill out a request to speak form and present it to the clerk. So you want to make sure if you're going to speak on any one of the regular agenda items or any of the agenda items, have that in before the conclusion of the staff presentation. If you have anything for for item 1B, just make sure you get that in now. And then also remember, this is a public meeting. It's on TV and is being recorded, and people may be nervous, so just, no catcalling, hooting and hollering from the crowd, and I recognize a lot of the same faces here. I think we'll be fine. Also, just make sure the microphone's on and speak up. We may just interrupt and say, hey, make sure you turn on the microphone. Other than that, we're going to get started here with General Administration Part 1. Item 1A is selection of a commission chair and vice chair. Do we have any nominations for a commission chair? I'll start and I'll nominate Danny Sandoval for the commission chair. Second by Commissioner Reed. Any other nominations for commission chair? No. Any nominations for commission vice chair?
What's that?
we can all look around at each other.
Nominate Suzanne.
I'll second that. So a nomination for Suzanne Reed by Danny Sandoval, seconded by Mr. Price. Any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, all in favor of the slate of election for commission chair for Danny Sandoval and vice chair for Suzanne Reed, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, we now have a new commission chair and vice chair. So I get to move now, right?
So true.
I don't want to move, but
I'm sure you'll be back. You'll be back before long.
Oh yeah, give me my jacket. Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody.
Congratulations.
Vice Chair. Okay, now with that, we're going to continue with our agenda. Any presentations, 1B, General Administration, presentations by public on matters not on the agenda in the jurisdiction of the Commission. Is there
We don't
any?
have any at this time.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 1C, any commissioner communications?
I'll say a couple of things.
Commissioner Johns?
I always like to say a couple of things that happened over the last couple of months. One of which, and I saw a couple of the commissioners there. Commissioner Price, I believe, was there as well, but we attended the rec center basketball court renovation. If you hadn't had a chance to go by the community center and check that out, I highly recommend it. It looks phenomenal, and it was a group effort by the city of West Sacramento, the Sacramento Kings, Kaiser Permanente, and am I missing, there's one more, right? The school district, a very important one, yes. Sorry about that. I knew there was 4. And looks phenomenal, and to my understanding, it has never been renovated since it opened, and so it was a really great thing to be there. The Kings were there, the kids were, they had a clinic afterwards, and it was a really enjoyable experience. So if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend swinging by there and taking a look at what was accomplished there. And then the other thing was I was able to attend a Bridgeway Island and River City High School musical performance from kind of a joint effort of both the elementary and the high school bands perform music. They're a really talented group. I don't know if it's just kind of a current influx of talent or if this is a credit to our teachers or maybe a little bit of both, but I'm thoroughly impressed with the level of music ability of not just the youngsters in the 7th and 8th grade, but the high school students are really outstanding performers. It's pretty impressive. So if you have a chance to catch a musical performance by either one of these or both, I would highly recommend that as well. One thing that comes up at every one of these performances that I'm able to attend is the need for a performing arts center, and I know I've kind of nagged about that a little bit internally as well, but I just kind of wanted to throw it out there because I feel we have a really talented group of people who are able to get grant funding. It's the best that I've ever seen, and I've worked in local government before, so really talented group, and I'm not just, that's not just part of my little spiel to get one of these, but if something does come up on the state or whatever, I would love to see something come through the commission that can get us maybe at least a start, a little drop in the bucket, something that can get us some funding toward somewhere for these kids to perform. They're doing a lot of this stuff in the gymnasiums, which reverberates pretty heavily, and it's very noisy, and it's just not ideal. But they're making do. But so just, if it's something that comes up, I know that it would be greatly appreciated. So, but thanks for everything you're doing so far, and really, it's good stuff. That's all.
All right. And I actually like to kind of tag on to that. I want to echo that sentiment. Being a musician myself as well, and knowing Ms. Dolores over there, at the music teacher, and we've discussed it many times. So any way I could help in the effort, and in any way, capacity, of course, you could always count on me too. Yeah?
So I'd also like to echo that as well, too. As someone who's really supported music, I mean, was part of a contingent of a lot of parents that went through, just 3 short years ago that's been transformational, where we went through and raised money to get 20 high school students on over to New Orleans for a week. And that's something that's continued to move on and transform the kids' lives and be part of the story. And some of those kids are still even going back on other scholarships to move ahead. But going through and seeing the performing arts and the visual and performing arts around the area without a great place for them to perform. I know tonight, even the drama program is hosting things in the Black Box Theater, which is great, but it's also very, very small. Or not the Black Box, but the one over at River City. So, I mean, to go through and echo that, being a part and being someone who's been a big supporter of the music programs around town and the visual and performing arts, again, if there's something that we can do for our students, and this is really a community enriching area. I think it's not just limited to our students, but this is something that, we can bring on in, small productions or anything that would be a true enhancement to the community and part of our recreation. I would be a huge proponent as well. So thank you, Commissioner Jones, for going through and bringing that up, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart as well.
All right. Anybody else? Vice Chair Reed.
Thank you. I was just involved in a group of women. I've been trying to address the issues of our older generation and their role in the community and their access to services, and in reaching out and pulling together groups of women. I've discovered that more and more people are finding the community center and really enjoying the programs and activities that are available there for movement, whether it's Tai Chi or yoga or light exercise that helps with their balance. And so it just reinforces what we were discussing in our last meeting when we authorized the Safe Home program, that coordinating our efforts in home modification to make homes more safe for our seniors and to help prevent falls meshes nicely with the programs that we have available to help improve mobility and balance among these seniors. And good job with the programs that we provide. And if we can somehow coordinate all of our activities so that people involved in one know about the other, I think it would really help spread the word even more. So thank you to our staff and our community center for providing those programs.
All right, thank you. Okay, all right, moving on. Now we have gotten to the consent agenda item, consideration of the approval for the minutes for the December 3rd, 2019 special meeting. Would somebody like to move?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the December 3rd special meeting.
Second.
And so moved by Commissioner Price and seconded by Commissioner Reed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion approved. Okay, item 3 on the regular agenda. This is a public hearing to announce the availability of the 2020 Community Development Block Grant Funding. We have Mr. Huerta Castro.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you. So before I begin, I did want to notify the commission that you should have received a memo clarifying that this item is actually not a public hearing.
Okay.
So, thank you. So again, good evening, Mr. Chairperson and members of the commission. I believe I have a PowerPoint.
You read the whole thing. And thank you for that clarification.
So I'm here this evening to announce the availability of Community Development Block Grant Funds for the 2020 program year, and to solicit feedback from the Commission on what goals staff should be focusing on for this year's funding. As the Commission may be already aware, any activities that we undertake with CDBG funds must meet one of the 3 national objectives. And as you can see from the slide, at least 70% of the activities have to benefit low and moderate income persons or households. And because of that, historically, the city has focused on that national objective with projects like the North Riverwalk Trail Extension and supporting the permanent supportive housing project that's currently underway on West Capitol Avenue. As an entitlement jurisdiction, the city must prepare a 5-year consolidated plan, which provides a roadmap and the goals that the city will focus on when allocating CDBG funding. And for every year of the consolidated plan, staff must also prepare an annual action plan, which details the specific activities that will be advancing those goals. The slide in front of you lists the goals that we have in our current 5-year consolidated plan. We have divided them as high priority goals and low priority goals. These are the programs and activities that have been funded in the past 4 years. And as you can see, all of them advance the goals in our existing 5-year consolidated plan. One important thing to note is that this is the last year of our current five-year consolidated plan. Staff, later this year, will be starting the process of developing our new five-year consolidated plan and starting the outreach to the community and coming to the commissions to solicit feedback on what new goals we want to focus on for the next 5 years. For this program year, however, we anticipate a similar allocation, which is estimated at approximately $430,000. HUD typically won't release the actual allocation until later this year, but we have to start this process before that allocation is formally announced. However, again, historically, the funding has been very similar from prior years. Only 80% of the funding can actually be used for projects. In this case, about $373,000 is what we are anticipating will be available for any projects or programs. So again, the question this evening for the commission is which goals staff should be focusing on for this year's annual action plan. I would like to note that staff made a similar presentation to the Economic Development and Housing Commission at their December meeting. And it was proposed that the 2020 allocation be designated to continue the E&F Street frontage improvement projects, which is a project that advances the Washington Realized goal, which is one of our high priority goals. The project, the initial funding that was allocated for that project only covered a portion of that infrastructure project, and additional funding is still required to complete it. Staff, however, will welcome any additional recommendations. And lastly, staff anticipates presenting a draft annual action plan to the Economic Development and Housing Commission in March, and a final annual action plan to the council in April. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions or any feedback from the commission. Thank you.
Questions, Commissioners?
Commissioner Reed?
Thank you. I know that we're a member of HIPAC, and so when this five-year plan was originally adopted, I don't believe that the SB1 and the housing and the homelessness was fully implemented. It may have been adopted, but the regulations weren't available. So I was wondering what the plans are for how we kind of align what we're doing with these resources relative to other funding that may be available from the state for the No Place Like Home and surround services approach to homelessness and the additional housing that the county is being funded for as well.
Sure. So you may recall that I noted that the 2017 and 2018 allocations were assigned to the Permanent Supportive Housing Project. This is a project that it received No Place Like Home funding, over $10 million in No Place Like Home funds. It also received 60 project-based vouchers, homeless vouchers. And in November of last year, it received its award of low-income housing tax credits. One of the requirements of the No Place Like Home funding is that referrals for those units come through the local continuum of care, which HPAC is the entity that serves as our local continuum of care. So there is a lot of coordination, and there will be a lot of coordination when that project is actually constructed to ensure that those units are filled with referrals from the HPAC, from our local homeless coordinator, and that we do everything that we can to ensure that placements are primarily for individuals that have some tie with the city of West Sacramento. They've either been homeless here for several years, they have families here. That is one of the main direction that we have received from the council. but we will be certainly coordinating with the HPAC on that project.
Do we have a current homeless count for West Sacramento?
Yes, I do, and I honestly don't remember off the top of my head, but the last point in time count was done, I believe, last year around this time, around February.
Okay.
I don't believe the official report has come out, believe it or not, but that has been done.
So more of that information will be integrated into the plan that
That is
you'll
correct.
be developing? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Price?
Yeah, I was going to talk about goal number 2, the high priority about the Washington Realized Sustainable Community Strategy. That probably has a lot more of the bearing for Parks and Recreation, dealing that, connecting the Riverwalk Trail improvements to the new C Street, I Street Bridge, connecting the I Street Bridge. And then also a lot of that ties into being a high-use activity of the kind of homeless population also. So that's something we're looking at with this, along with all the other stuff. So your goal for this meeting was to get out of us, like, affirmation of those goals or feedback on each of those goals, or specifically one of those goals?
Specifically, which one of these goals, 1 or 2 or all of them, we should focus on for the 2020 funding.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that we do get limited funding, so we do have to be fairly strategic in how we spend those limited CDBG funds.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have anything else to add to that right now. It's interesting to hear what everybody else has to say.
Commissioner Eckler?
Yeah, just as far as you went through and said that with the E and F Street frontages and those projects have been started, and then there was a gap in the funding. So, assuming that these funds are allocated, are they going to get us where we need to be for funding? Is there still going to be a gap that needs to be closed, as far as just from the overall picture? Certainly, when we're looking at priorities, right, and as to your point, right, they're limited, to go through and diversify, if that's only going to get us a part way to our goal as well, too, and we're still assessing a gap there.
Sure. My understanding is that if the 2020 additional funding is allocated to that E&F Street project, we will probably be around 80 to 90% of the total cost for that project. So we will be very close, but there still will be a small gap to cover.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johns?
I had a question, and then I have some input on the priorities. And I think it ties into what maybe you just said, but additional funding, you've talked about 80% so far allocated toward the project. Which project exactly was that again?
So the funding that we will get, the approximately $430,000, we can only use 80% of that for actual programs and activities or projects.
So it doesn't have to be a development project, it can be just allocated to any of these goals, right?
It would have to be any project or program that meets one of those goals that you see up there.
Okay. And then the input, I guess, in my opinion, would be the high priority number 1. And I think one of the reasons, well, a lot of reasons being, but one of them being, I think homelessness is such a unique and personal challenge for each person that's going through it. And we can create all the shelter that we want, but certain situations would benefit from the shelter where other situations, no matter what housing or how much we build, it's just not going to work out for them because of what other reasons, whether they be mental health, substance abuse. In cases of domestic violence where people just need a safe place to escape, the shelter would work. But in cases of extreme addiction, no matter how many shelters we have, I just don't feel that may apply. So ways to reduce the impacts or the incidence of homelessness, I think really focuses on the homeless coordinator type positions where you have somebody who can assess each scenario, try to put them on a path that's unique for them, get them services, mental health services, safety, whatever their condition may be. I really feel there needs to be a human interaction there with each individual in each case, versus putting money toward actual structure development, at least at this time, especially if the funding's limited to what it is. My opinion or recommendation is that if we can expand those positions that are available to people who are experiencing homelessness, the liaison, coordinator positions, psychiatric, any of those services, if the funding can be applied to anywhere there, I feel as though maybe lives could be changed a little more immediately than if they were just applied toward actual brick and mortar buildings.
Thank you.
Commissioner Eckler?
I'd like to echo Commissioner Jans. My faith community, one of the things that they take a lot of pride in is working with Mercy Coalition and Shores of Hope, but to actually serve as a warming center. So there's an intake process that they're bringing these people on in, they're giving them a place to be. And although it's even just a temporary area that they can go through and have a reprieve from an area, there's an intake process where, again, it becomes transformational. It does affect lives, even to the point where they're going and doing things of basic needs, where they're sending them out with a care package and a pair of sweats or something that, at least for a night, gets them off the streets. And so the incidents and impacts of homelessness, of going through and saying from a program sense, I'm going to echo Commissioner Jans on this, and something that I've gone through and seen just be transformational, even in small doses, if there's ways that we can think creatively on how we can, subsidize these programs or go through and allow the extension of resources that are around to, shift the dynamic. I would be fully in supportive of high priority number one myself.
Thank you.
Forgot to add one other note here, and I apologize if I could
Go
jump
ahead.
in one. The West Sac Streets team, I know that we've had that throughout the community, and I've been tracking it as best I can as a member of the community, but I know there's been at least a couple of cases of some pretty good success with a couple individuals there. If there's any way to tie into those types of programs, or maybe even tie in some of this funding to expand that program, that might be a way to kind of, go on the tail there of what was just said, of actually impacting lives immediately and directly, and providing them with some solace and experience and all the other good things that program brought out too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just also like to echo that. My wife's actually been, helped volunteer within that program as well too. And again, these are the type of things we need to lean into, right? These are the ones that we need to go through, and that's what makes West Sacramento special, right? To have these type of resources where as a community, we're solving the problem. And to go through and say from an infrastructure sense, that's important, right? But to lean in and double down as a community to go through and say, but there's a gap here. How do we fill that gap? How do we think creatively? I think West Sacramento does it no better than anyone else. That's when you get a lot of people to think creatively to go through and apply, things that move the needle. And, I just think fully supportive of that. So thank you.
I also want to say, I would like to say that the homeless coordinator position in the city seems to be pretty important to make these, to point out that, these people need to be found, and they need to be taken and shown where these services are, what services are being offered, and that's really important. So I just wanted, reading through all the materials, and I know that's coming from this funding, correct?
The homeless coordinator position, I believe, is being paid out of, or at least partially out of Measure E.
Okay.
And DST, Downtown Streets Team, I believe is also fully funded by Measure E, at least the homeless portion of Measure E.
Okay, thank you. And just one thing that kind of stood out was how homeless parents, living in either sheltered or unsheltered areas that have children, and they need to find a place to live, to have their children live with them. That's of course, pulls at the heart, but at the same time, if there's a way we could try to help these families, try to make it happen. Yeah, Commissioner Reed?
I think I agree with what everyone said. My understanding is that with the new housing for the homeless, it's understood, a lot of that funding was pulled from the mental health programs, and so it is really earmarked to provide housing, but with wraparound services that can address the mental health. And so I completely second the, the referral and the coordination, et cetera. Just on my other question, because Chair Sandoval mentioned it as well, on the schools, do we have a count on the McKinney-Vento children in the school system who qualify as homeless children that are counted?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. Because I think this concept of addressing the extra needs that being homeless creates for those kids, and also coordinating through the school system with those kinds of services would be a big benefit. And the other thing is, I know that we, like our work program, which, I love, and we still have some folks, if you go online in the community, who are convinced that the homeless can't be helped and they don't want to be helped. And so I think it's really important for us to continue with the success stories and what has been accomplished by providing supportive services and the housing for these folks, so that people can understand not only more about where these folks come from and the whole range of reasons why they might be homeless, but also that there are good outcomes if we do it right and provide the services and supports they need, and still treat them with dignity and some compassion and understanding. That's it.
Correct. And just want to add, circle back to the permanent supportive housing project. That is going to be an integral part of that project. Supportive services will be offered on-site to ensure that those that are going to be housed there are able to maintain their housing and receive the adequate services that they need, whether it be mental health, substance abuse, work readiness. All of those wraparound services are going to be offered as an integral part of that permanent supportive housing project.
Commissioners?
Yeah, I got one more thing. So on goal 2 is also just talking about sort of a couple different ways, as we talked about. One reason of incidences of homelessness could be substance abuse or those types of things. Another one is just rising rents in town, or not in town, but in the world, or in California. Looking at item 2, also there's a part of it that it's talking about it's an actual tangible goal, if that makes sense. It's like, we're going to use this money to build something that's going to allow for an affordable housing project to be built. So if we're able to realize like you said, we'll get to about 90% of the infrastructure improvements that are needed for that, then we're going to be able to allow someone else to come in and finish that project with them building more affordable housing, meaning affordable housing, I guess, can mean 2 different things. Is one, it costs less, and 2, it's subsidized, both of those. So looking at that as like, if we're able to look at goal number 2 as we have a thing that we need to get done, and this is funding that's going to help us get that done. Goal 1, it's great, reduce the impact of homelessness. It's like, it's a little intangible. And I think the goal is, in goal 1, is to continue funding the outreach coordinators, and there's some specific steps to that. I think if we're going to be able to, get item 2, goal 2 done as well, and I really can't pick, and I'm not being very helpful, but thinking about goal 2 is just like an actual goal that we can achieve, and we know how much it's going to cost, and we know this funding will make a huge dent in that. What we don't know is what the outcome of throwing a bunch of money into goal 1 is going to do, as we can't really track that as much. So I think they're both important, and not going to really say one over the other, but I think number 2 gives us the kind of the most we're going to invest this money that's going to allow for someone else to come in and invest money that's going to impact us also. So it's not just us spending money to get the result, but it's spending money to encourage other economic growth.
Correct, yeah, and I would like to note as well that the improvements on 8th Street are also going to benefit adjacent affordable housing developments. If you look at the map, West Gateway Place, which is a large family project, is adjacent to that project. Washington Courtyard, which is another affordable housing project, and right across the street from that is a Yolo County Housing, affordable housing development. So it's directly impacting and assisting 3 affordable housing developments with well over 150 affordable housing units. Just kind of to speak on what Commissioner Price was getting at.
It's a valid point.
They're all important, right?
Yeah. No, it's valid.
Yeah, but I think Commissioner Price raises a good issue, which is in goal number 1, for public consumption especially, to have it, as you go through the plan and develop it more specifically, to have it be more specific about exactly what the actions that you're taking to address the homelessness issue and the, shelter, housing, wraparound services, will go to produce the outcome of reducing the incidence and impacts of homelessness. And the other thing is that homelessness is though it's directed at that population, the benefits of supporting and helping these folks to sustainable lives is a benefit to the entire community and to the economic health of the community as well. So I think as you go through the process and flesh out exactly what the money would fund, et cetera, and be very specific about it, I think it would help the public understand exactly what the programs are and what they are intended to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing is linked to, median income, which I think somewhere in here I read was like about 87,000. Is that accurate?
So any activities with CDBG have to benefit low and moderate income households. The definition under CDBG is at or below 80% of area median income.
Okay. So I think there's a big gap between somebody who's actively homeless and somebody who's making 80% of the median income. And I think that's where the challenge will be for applying this money. If we apply it toward affordable housing, will it directly impact those people who are actively homeless? Or do we apply it to money to get people to get to 80% of that median income, which is a big step for somebody who's, not living in a house? And I think that's going to be the big challenge. So I think while they're both very applicable priorities, they're very different in a sense, if that makes sense.
You build them up and then you don't have a place for them to go. That's the other part of it too, is you fund things that are going to help people become not homeless, and then there's not any affordable housing to move into. You've just created this cycle of homelessness. I don't know.
Well, part of Goal 1 talks about interim housing
Yeah.
linked with supportive services. So, I mean, at some point, I guess that's to my point, is that at some point they have to go from being homeless to an interim housing, and then from there, through job skills and other ways, they can get to that median income to get into the affordable housing. So while I think affordable housing might help people who are struggling with, monthly expenditures and things like that, I don't know if it'll directly affect active homeless.
Well, it might reduce the incidence of homelessness because someone now might not become homeless.
True.
They're
tough.
both great, they're both great, we want to fund both of them.
Yeah, I would say, have both priority 1 and 2, whatever we can do to really look at that. I mean, I think to the point, right, that they are closely related, but they're very different outcomes, right? So, I mean, I think Commissioner Price had a great point in the sense is that, if we can have a tangible outcome, or, we can go and say, I think that, based upon even the incidence of homelessness, that's a really broad brush. So if we go and say from a correlation standpoint that this $300,000 are going to impact 20 homeless members. Let's just go through and use that, or to go through and make that measurable, I think it'll be a little bit less nebulous.
I think that's what Commissioner Reed was saying too, is when you're going through these meetings, is the feedback from us, I think, might be to nail down a little bit more of the details of like what that grant money would go, you got it in there, what it goes toward, but not really what it goes toward, if that makes sense. But I know that's also the idea, is that it can be used for the need.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, and again, at this time, we are at the beginning stages of that, creating the annual action plan, so this is the feedback that we need to hear, knowing what our ultimate overlying goals are that we have to achieve, what are the activities that we need to look at to use our 2020 funding.
I think it's important to remind us that we don't need to solve this problem tonight. We need to give you feedback to.
At least point us in the right direction, and from what I'm hearing, certainly
all wanna
goals
solve
1
it.
and 2 is what we should be focusing on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huerta.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item number 4, consideration of an update for the Memorial Park ADA upgrades project by Chahal. Welcome, Mr. Chahal.
Good evening.
I can see it.
Good evening. I want to take some time and give the commission an update on the Memorial Park project. The project has came a long way over the last several months, and it's changed the community quite a bit in that area. So we wanted to give an update as it comes to completion. Some background on the project. The project construction started in July. Prior to that, there was some community outreach, and with the commission's recommendations, we made several adjustments to the design. The restroom concession stand was added to the project to both benefit the community as a restroom and add storage for Little League and a concession stand for the snack bar. The sunken dugouts, this was added to the plan as well. These dugouts have a storage capacity with them as well, and with these, it was able to keep the historic value to the park, and that was really important to the community when we first made the outreach. Also, some of the landscape improvements that I didn't list on here were also made, so it was very important that the trees that we removed were replaced. So with that, in this park, there was 37 additional trees planted. With that, it's as you'll see as the presentation goes on, some of the existing trees that were in there, there's able to be picnic areas for people to enjoy, and not only a park that's going to be utilized for Little League, but for the whole entire community. And that was really, really important to utilize that. So as we go through here, a barbecue area was also added. And there were some challenges. This was an existing park. It was pretty old in the community, and the challenges that we came across during construction, we didn't have very good as-built plans on this. We didn't know where lines were running. We kind of had an idea, but as we started getting into here and our alluvial conditions that the city has, we need our construction windows very short. With Little League season ending and winter coming, we had to hit some pretty big milestones to make sure this project was completed on time. And the general contractor was able to keep the construction schedule on time, work past some of those challenges, excavating out the dugouts and a lot of the existing structures, and utilizing some of the existing irrigation that was there was important to the project. So we didn't have to necessarily purchase all new supplies for the project. We were able to utilize the existing irrigation valves and a lot of the fixtures that were there and incorporate them into the new design. The new design is more water efficient, so the plants and choice that was put into the center spine, as you'll see. And going into this is a play area. So there's upgrades made in here as well. As you can see, there's all new brand new sod here, and a shade structure was put over the entire play area. In time, there's trees planted all around here. There's about 6 or 7 trees around on the north end of the playground, and a new, not working, there we go. A new net climber was also added. So the play area increased almost by another half, so it was important. And then the Cybertech trash cans kind of keep that uniform design that we have in the other parks, and to help maintenance out, were added in this project as well. So as you can see, all new curb was added around the play area, and new walkways throughout the park. Over here you can see the example of the barbecue area. And this will be an area where the whole community can gather. This shade structure is coming in just about a week now, actually, and it will be put over on this barbecue area along with the restroom concession stand. And in this area, there'll be about 4 picnic tables for the whole community to gather. So that was important for the community to also have a spot in this park, multiple spots to gather And the existing horseshoe pits, this was initially started as an ADA project, and but going through the design process and with the recommendations that we got from the community and the commission, it was able to transform into something that was a lot more than that. It added a lot of value to the community from adding picnic tables in these shaded areas, and kind of incorporate some of the historic stuff that was out there, such as these horseshoe pits. They're now fully ADA compliant, along with all the other amenities in the park. And then to the right of these, not pictured, there's a small parking lot too. And all the ramps and sidewalk upgrades that we made on the north and south side of the park are made so they can be integrated with the street projects that are going to come from in the years coming. Also, we took into consideration on the east and west side of the park, in future design, if there's any desired sidewalks in there, that we can create a loop for the park. So the center spine of the park, this will have lighting as well. In these older neighborhoods, there's very little street lighting, and to illuminate the area, it was important to have a center spine that you can see down for safety reasons, and to have illumination. So down here, there's a planter. This has trees down here as well, and then new ADA compliant bleachers at the end, which are really nice. They're not only compliant, but it allows the public to be able to get in and out of the bleachers in a much more uniform way. It has a center walkway down it. Here's a better look at those bleachers. So we have 2 sets of these, and then down on the south end of the project, we were able to utilize a lot of the existing bleachers that were there. The entire center spine is also paved, and new drainage is added. That was one of the problems that we're having in the park initially, was the drainage. And that was one of the challenges. Our grade levels in the park were different on both sides, so integrating some new drainage into there and tying it into the very shallow existing storm drains that are around there was one of the challenges that we had to come across. And that comes to our sunken dugouts. These are really nice. They have the ADA lifts in there to make them all fully compliant, and a lot of room for a whole entire team in there. They also have storage onto the sides of 2 of those. So here's looking inside, and these lifts, they are key operated, so they will be locked at if they're not in use, and there is some training involved with that, but there's a staircase right next to them, and they are fully ADA compliant to help anybody that needs to get down there. With this project, on the far side of the park, there wasn't very many upgrades going on, but we were able to upgrade the at-grade dugouts and add a paved area and new benches into that area. This allows to meet the compliance, and also it kept from track out and has a nice paved fenced area for teams to use. So kind of the next steps in the project are the restroom and concession stand building in the pavilion. So that's coming in, like I said, in a week now, and we'll be starting on that project. And the final ADA approval, we don't see any issues with that. Those plans were already given to the ADA and reviewed, so it'll just be the final stamp on those. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions from the commission.
All right, thank you. It's a great presentation. The park looks beautiful.
Thank you.
I mean, this is one of the few projects that I've seen as part of this commission, see from the beginning to this point right now. It's not done, but it's a great advancement, and I'm hoping the Little League and the community will be very proud of this park for them. So commissioners, with that, anybody would like to start?
I just have to
Commissioner Eckler?
go and say that it's, living in this neighborhood and being someone who's played in those fields for, many, many years ago, great progress. I mean, this is transformational to the community. I know that getting through some of this right there, this is an area that was near and dear to many people's hearts, especially within the community, within the Little League. And, this was not an easy elephant to take a bite out of, right? So this is something that we're, really, it took a lot to go through and get agreement on this. I love it. I appreciate the lighting in there. As someone who lives in these streets as well too, I agree with you that we got, not a lot of street lighting, so anything we can do to make it safer and, go through and keep, our community, nice and I mean, this is really, really great, and I know there's still work to go, but this is, hats off to you.
Commissioner Jones?
I guess I expected to speak, but I guess, as you know, Jay, I mean, I'm pretty privy to kind of what's been going on and up to date, and I guess more or less I just wanted to thank everybody for what they did, and that includes, our elected leadership too. I know that they had a decision to make, and we all kind of went all in on it, and it started off with a much smaller budget, but little by little, I think we were able to kind of work collectively and come together to make it happen. So thank you very much, I think, on behalf of the Little League. The Little League's very excited. We had a board meeting last night, and they're very excited about starting, although a lot needs to get done in the next 4 weeks from the league and the city. So we're trying to coordinate all that to make it all happen for, they're starting March 14th. But the fields look fantastic. We drove, been by there, so everything's scheduled to play, and we'll just work through whatever issues together. But I'm really happy with the relationship that was built too, between the city and the league. Where it's at today was not where it was at 2 years ago, and I think that's a credit to leadership on both sides, being very open and collaborative together. I think the community is really going to enjoy this. I think the kids are going to have a blast, and I look forward to continuing to do what we can to just make it one of the best premier parks. I know that there's a lot of interest in bringing more tournaments, like statewide tournaments, so they can experience West Sacramento. And again, I keep bringing it up, but I don't know of another Little League park that's ADA compliant like this. And I think that's a really special element to where I know Natomas has a challenger division. I really am going to work hard to bring that over to West Sac so that kids can experience these dugouts. I mean, there's nothing that, in my knowledge, that exists like this, and I think that's something unique to West Sacramento, and it should be shared with, with everybody who wants to be a part of that. So I'll keep kind of championing this park around our area to try to get some exposure to it and let kids enjoy it. I think they're going to have a lot of fun with it. So thank you to everybody involved, and I can't believe it's like weeks away from being finished. It's been a long time. So
I do think that's really great how this is all kind of, you love it when a plan comes together. And there was a huge plan to get the things that needed to be done to play baseball done first. So it's like looking at it and going, wow, we actually did that. And we got the things that are done to play ball. And also, thanks for giving us the update, because I think that's important to when people show up and they say, yeah, it's not even done yet. Are we getting a snack bar? Are we getting bathrooms? Those things. Just having people aware of what's happening and the plan so that that can be shared to the public when they show up at the park for a game to know what's going on. So totally appreciate the update and glad to see it's all coming together.
Commissioner Reed?
I really appreciated hearing you comment that the feedback that you got from the community was that this or that was needed and that you made adjustments as you went along. And I think it's important for the community to understand that when they participate in the process, that they are being heard and that their concerns and desires are being reflected in the plans that the city is making. And I think it'll be important that people understand that this is more than a Little League park, baseball park. It's a park that's accessible to and available with amenities that will serve the entire community. So congratulations on that. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Chahal, for the update. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the
Thank you
support.
for coming. All right, next on the agenda item today is number 5, workshop update on the Bees Lake Habitat Restoration Plan. Mr. Dixon?
Chairman Sandoval and members of the Park Commission, it's my privilege to kind of tell you where we are with the Bees Lake Restoration Plan. We've been going through a deliberative process to bring you a preferred alternative this evening for you to review, comment on, and hopefully concur with, so that we can advance to the next part of the grant to bring that into a 30% design, and then prepare ourselves to go to City Council and then further funding to actually realize those improvements. So it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Brown from Douglas Environmental, and he's going to walk you through a presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, the Chair and Commissioners. Again, Doug Brown, Douglas Environmental. This is the second time I've been in front of you. Had the opportunity to present back in November, I think it was November 5th. At that time, we had made some progress. We had done a lot of internal work as far as identifying the baseline environmental conditions for the Bees Lakes area and started to identify some conceptual alternatives, but we hadn't had an opportunity to meet with stakeholders and really get their input. And so we've made a lot of progress since then. And so I want to update you tonight on where we are. I'm going to do just a sort of an overview, as I did at the prior meeting, of the Bees Lakes area, kind of how it fits within the regional context, particularly land use and recreational context. Talk about the scope of work, where we are on that scope. Discuss the conceptual alternatives that we've identified, and then the analysis and evaluation that we've gone through to be able to identify a preferred alternative, and then I'll talk about the next steps. And so I did want to reiterate, this is a grant from the Delta Conservancy, and there was a comment made earlier about how the city staff is particularly good at, and resourceful and adept at getting grants, and I think this is another good example of being able to do so. And so with that, I think I have the clicker, and I'm just going to guess which button it is. It's really sensitive. Okay. No, that's not it.
Not it.
Okay. So, just to give you an overview of the constraints, and I guess sort of the orientation of the Delta Conservancy and what they were looking for as far as a project. Their real focus is on restoration components, and so, you know, the goals and objectives of this grant are to evaluate opportunities to restore disturbed habitat and historical ecological processes in the Bees Lakes area. It's to explore approaches to improve pond water quality and the ability of the Bees Lakes area to support listed species. It's also to identify opportunities to better manage public access and to implement recreational improvements in that area, and then to protect public health and safety. So, This is just a map to orient you to where Bees Lakes is located. It's right on the Sacramento River in the Southport area of the city. It is within the Southport setback area. There's basically two openings to the Sacramento River that were included in that levee setback area, one directly to the north of the Bees Lakes area and one directly to the south. And so also this map gives you a sense of, even though this is a little older, it gives you a sense of the development in the Sacramento area compared to the West Sacramento area surrounding Bees Lakes. This gives you a better sense of it, and I wanted to highlight this just because right now the Bees Lakes is a fairly remote area in the city. It does get activity, but the area basically to the north and west is fairly undeveloped. It includes agricultural lands and open space, and so not a lot of development right around the Bees Lakes area now, but the sense is that that is changing, and there are plans to basically develop a lot of this area. And so this is an aerial view that gives you a sense looking to the south. The disturbed area is the Southport levee, and that was during construction, and so that has been constructed. The road on the left is South River Road. That was the old levee. The new levee is now within that disturbed area, and then Bees Lakes is that densely vegetated area. You can actually see one of the lakes in the lower portion there. If you look out towards the top to the right, you can see it's very undeveloped right now. And so this map, and I apologize, it is a little difficult to read, but Bees Lakes is that sort of brownish area in the center of the site. You can see the Sacramento River along the bottom of the site, or the bottom of this map. And then the Liberty development and the Riverbank development are identified on here. Liberty is directly to the north of Bees Lakes, and then Riverbank is to the actually, if this map was oriented correctly, I would just say it's the top. Liberty is the top, and then to the left is Riverbank.
Okay.
And also wanted to highlight this. One of the things that came up during our stakeholder meetings was how does this Bees Lakes area and restoration of this area fit within the larger context? This gives you a sense of how it fits within the land use context and how there will be a lot of development coming to this area, and that will affect what happens in the Bees Lakes area. And then also, this was a map that was created maybe a year or so ago that identifies trail alignments, and specifically a bike trail along the new levee that would extend all along that levee and then have connections to create sort of a loop network. And it identifies areas where you may have restroom facilities and parking facilities. And so the city is thinking very much about how the recreational components and recreational development of this area could occur. And the Bees Lakes recreational features really fit within that larger context. So with that, I'm going to talk about the scope of work. And when I presented to you earlier, we were basically in the first few steps of this. We defined some environmental baseline conditions. We were doing the baseline analysis of what's out on the site. We were starting to develop some conceptual alternatives, and I presented 3 of those alternatives to you at that time. But we hadn't started the stakeholder advisory group at that time. And so since that time, we've made a lot of progress. We've been able to have a couple of stakeholder some planning meetings. We've had a number of individual meetings with stakeholders, and we received some really good input during those meetings. The next steps in this process are basically analyzing and evaluating the alternatives, defining the preferred alternative, preparing 65% design plans, and conducting CEQA compliance. And so we've done most of these. We haven't initiated the design yet or the CEQA compliance. So everything else we've made a lot of progress on. And So I did want to highlight some of the stakeholder concerns that were raised. There was a big concern about dumping out at the site. A lot of the people that come to Bees Lakes, they're naturalists, they're recreationalists, they don't want to come to a site with trash. No one really does. And so that was a big concern, just the trash that gets dumped there and then the issues associated with that. The degradation of the habitat, there's been some homeless issues out in that area as well, and so there were concerns there. There was some discussion about, well, could you close South River Road or gate it somehow and try and keep people off of South River Road so they don't have access, because that's one of the big issues is vehicles can come there day and night, and some people like to come and park and hike and wander around, and others are dumping trash, and so is there a way to control that? There's also, there was a sense of, if you're going to look at conceptual alternatives, identify something that you could actually get done. There was a real interest in making changes out there as soon as possible, and so maybe not being too grand as far as the alternatives that get implemented, but instead just try and make some progress. There was a real interest in trying to figure out how to integrate equestrian uses into the site. There has been historic equestrian use on the site, and so trying to figure out with the recreational components how you could do that. And then we'd identified some ideas as far as recreational components, and boardwalks seem to really resonate with folks. Portions of the site get wet and in the wintertime, and just the idea of having boardwalks that can kind of control where people go and provide a nice visual amenity. And then we discuss, are there things you can do as far as making portions of those boardwalks maybe be able to float, so if water comes up, they actually float up and go back down. So. And then also just different ideas of accessing the river. So those are some of the topics that came up during the stakeholder meetings. So we initially identified 3 alternatives when I presented to you the last time. We had a minimal grading alternative, which really just limits the amount of disturbance on the site. We had the full floodplain connection alternative, and then we had a water quality alternative. And through the engagement with stakeholders, we actually eliminated the water quality connection alternative. That was an alternative that just had a connection of pipes going through the site. And I realize in their staff report that some of the language might be a little confusing as far as the names of the alternatives. So I'm happy to clarify that if there's any issues there. But now we've got a third alternative that's been added, basically replaced that water quality connection alternative, and it's called the River Terrace Enhancement. And so I'll go through and talk about these in more detail. So this is a minimal grading concept design. And really what this is looking at water quality issues in the 2 ponds and trying to figure out, is there a way you can address those water quality issues and improve the habitat? So it's really focused on raising the elevation of those ponds. Bottom elevation, they're fairly deep. Trying to raise up that elevation so you can create some sort of more marsh habitat, create some vegetation in there that would allow more filtering of the waters. You're filling that area that has some contamination in it now and providing a more pleasing and higher quality water in those ponds. So something that's a little more pleasing to see. It's not the best looking, they're not the best looking ponds right now, and they do have water quality issues. So this alternative basically includes partially filling those ponds to enhance the habitat and the water quality, and then it includes removing invasive plants, planting some riparian vegetation in disturbed areas to enhance that habitat, adding recreational amenities, cleaning up the trash and debris, and then cleaning up the pond soils. So alternative 2, and these alternatives really do build on each other. This alternative includes all of the components of alternative 1, but the one difference, and it's a major difference, is it actually cuts a culvert through South River Road and connects to the Sacramento River. And so that would allow water from the Sacramento River, when the river comes up, to flow into the Bees Lakes area and inundate that area. There would be some enhancement in the channel. There's a bit of an existing channel that connects the two ponds, so there'd be an enhancement there to make a better connection. Basically, you'd have water flowing in and flowing out. And what that does is it creates potentially some salmon habitat, or at least the ability for some generation of salmon food, basically phytoplankton, zooplankton, that would be generated in this area and could wash out into the Sacramento River and provide some additional food for migrating salmon through this area. And that was one of the things the Delta Conservancy was interested in, is can you provide some additional, specifically fish habitat? There's a strong interest in fish habitat. So the only difference here is that connection, and then all the other components are included. So you could do alternative 1 and then do alternative 2 on top of that. And this is an example culvert, so it's a large opening. You would still have South River Road there, but you would have this large opening underneath that would allow water to come through there. The last alternative is the river terrace enhancement concept design. And this is an idea of basically lowering the level of the land adjacent to the Sacramento River so it gets inundated more frequently. There's a real interest in, from the state, particularly California Department of Fish and Wildlife and NOAA Fisheries, to have increased salmon habitat that gets inundated on a regular basis. Right now, this area inundates during very large storm events when the river is high. This would lower it and provide additional time when it'd be inundated, provide that fish habitat. This could be combined with the other alternatives. It could be combined specifically with alternative 2, or it could be done just with alternative 1 and have this inundation area. This would be both alternative 2 and alternative 3 would be fairly substantial construction projects. So again, just the difference is the Riverside Terrace, all the other components are the same as alternative 1. So in evaluating these different alternatives, we were looking at a number of criteria. And so the project team with engagement with stakeholders identified specific criteria. We focused on habitat benefits, we focused on water quality benefits, and then recreational benefits. And we did an analysis of a number of different components for habitat. We looked at salmon, listed species, the ability to provide freshwater marsh, a number of different things. Recreation as well, access to the river, access within the Bees Lakes area. And based on that analysis, we concluded that alternatives 2 and 3 would provide the greatest benefit from a habitat and water quality standpoint. The recreational benefits are really pretty much the same. There's a little bit of a downside on the recreational side for alternatives 2 and 3. But with 2, you have more inundation in the Bees Lakes area, so access would be a little bit limited. In alternative 3, even though you can provide additional access to the river, you may have some other inundation area that restrict your access at times. And so based on the benefits, we identified 2 and 3 as having higher benefits than alternative 1. But then we also evaluated the project constructability. How could you actually get this done? The scale of the construction you need to do. The long-term operation and maintenance, this was a particular concern for the team, because if you're connecting to the Sacramento River, you're basically having water and sediments moving back and forth. There's a lot of erosional forces. There's concerns about how, if something goes wrong, as far as water coming into the Bees Lakes area, what's the city's responsibility to take care of that over time. And so we really saw a lot of concern related to that long-term operation and maintenance, and then just the total cost related to the benefits that would be generated. Obviously, alternatives 2 and 3 include substantially more construction activity and would require much more in grant funding to actually build than alternative one. And so, based on that analysis, city staff identified alternative one as the lowest cost, least invasive alternative. It was the alternative that was supported by the stakeholders. They were really, as I said earlier, wanting to have something that moves forward. I think the key interest is cleaning up the site, trying to remove some of that invasive, some of the invasive species, and implementing those recreational components as soon as possible. And so that's what alternative one does. And so that was selected by city staff as preferred alternative, and we are here tonight to get your input on that selection. The last slide is the next steps. And so, based on the feedback we received from you tonight, we'll initiate 30% design in the California Environmental Quality Act compliance, CEQA compliance process. Plan to schedule a workshop with City Council to ensure consistency with the city's goals and strategic plan. We will prepare a draft habitat restoration plan and circulate that for review. We'll have another meeting with stakeholders to get their input, and then based on that input, we'll go to 65% design and then complete CEQA. And so with that, I'm open to comments or questions or whatever you'd like to say.
Great, thank you very much for your presentation.
Sure.
Commissioner Price would like to go first.
Yeah, I got a couple questions for you here.
Sure.
So alternative one, get that. And then alternative two is what was presented before as alternative three?
That's correct.
Okay, and then alternative three is new, but it looks like your benefit analysis in the staff report is still based off the old order of things? Or is, because it has on-site water quality, then 2 water quality connection, and then 3 floodplain connection?
Yeah, and that's the clarification I wanted to make. It's just the naming nomenclature there is a little different.
So floodplain connection, alternative 3 is actually now alternative 2?
It's alternative 2.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was, I think we conveyed information.
I get it.
Yeah, we just didn't
want to
convey
make
it
sure that's
correctly.
clear so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
And so 2 and 3 have very similar, like, scores on that. And just throw it out there, I'm leaning toward alternative 1 as my pick also, only because, like you said, we want to get something done, and knowing that we can build on alternative 1 to connect things, especially, I'm not a huge fan of alternative 2, the full connection, just because it makes that space potentially unusable for longer periods of time.
Yes.
And we could always go from the alternative 1 solution to the alternative 3 solution down the road, since the only changes would then be on the river side of the remainder levee.
That's correct.
Okay. Couple other things on the stakeholder concerns about dumping is certainly my kind of rule of thumb is the more eyes you get on something, the less problems you're going to have. So if you create a situation where there is a lot of illegal dumping happening there now, but then there's a bunch of trails and a bunch of people on bikes, a bunch of people on horses, all these things are getting used all the time, then the tendency for other people to want to do nefarious acts in that spot go way down. That's, research tells us that.
I would concur.
You're agreeing with me, that's
Yes.
good. So that, same thing with like sort of the degradation of it, of being able to, like, how do we access this? Are people going to try to do dumb stuff on the levee? Probably not, because there's going to be people there to watch it.
Yes.
So I think we solve a lot of the stakeholder concerns by moving forward with alternative 1 right away. We start to build stuff. And then particularly kind of looking at the conceptual recreation features, how being able to have trails that not only go long ways, I'm not going to say north-south, because I think it's kind of like northwest to southwest, but trails going long ways being like the kind of main tracks, and then things branching off of those is a great idea, because right now you can go in there and there's sort of our trails that go north-south, and they're kind of, I don't know, you call pirate trails or something, where it's like, they weren't officially trails, they just are now.
Yeah.
But a question I had on that is, identified as a conceptual recreation is existing use of the BMX jumps course. So are we now saying that's cool and that exists, or is that still like, that right now it doesn't really exist?
So I would say, right now, there are 2 BMX courses in there. And some of the stakeholders involved are big fans of that BMX course, and they identified that there are other courses in some other cities that have been constructed, that the cities have figured out ways, working with stakeholders, to address the liability issues. And so they were strongly encouraging continuing to have some sort of BMX operations in there. Whether that's feasible is a big question.
No, I don't disagree with you, because I go to the Elk Grove Bike Park all the time, or used to go more often, and it's the same thing. It's just open, and there's a sign that says what the rules are, and that's it. It's not like they don't make it a huge thing. Whereas that's the tendency for, I'd like to say, for cities to do, and I'm looking at you guys, say the tendency is to make it harder to do things recreationally. I think that also addresses some of the, not that the city's making it harder, but the last thing on my thing was the equestrian access to the site. I know that the city and the discussions we've had here have all about been, that's a great place to ride horses around. That's what we've heard from the stakeholder groups. The challenge is, right now, you're going through vacant land, not really vacant land, agricultural land, trails that head toward there, and then now seeing that a lot of that area around there is going to be built out, is then maintaining those connections. So, because also my understanding is that the majority of the horse properties are along kind of Davis Road, and people are going to kind of nod a little bit, but around that area, still being able to get through those other developments to this site. And then the bigger issue is then how do we get over the levee? If there's issues with whether you were allowed to have a horse on the road, on the levee, those things. So again, going through when you're getting through the next steps in this is seeing what we, the city, can do to overcome some of those objections at the state level that are preventing that levee access for equestrian purposes.
Yeah, and I realized that, and Tracy warned me that this was sensitive, that I skipped over the recreational map that we identified on here. I don't know how to get back, to be honest, but.
So you do the other click, the right click, and it'll bring up the menu, and you can say back.
Okay.
There you go. Previous. Sensitive.
Oh, wait.
There you go.
So right there. So I just leapt right over that and didn't even notice. And so this actually differs a little bit from the exhibit that you have. This really identifies different features that we've identified in the plans. These could be implemented with all 3 alternatives. And the difference is, initially, we had identified a foot trail equestrian path as the blue line along the outside perimeter adjacent to the new Southport setback levee. On this, we've changed it to along South River Road, and we just wanted to, we got strong input from stakeholders that they wanted equestrian access and use in here, and so we wanted to include it on here, but there were some concerns about, okay, how close can that be next to the levee? Are there concerns with the horses getting on the levees? And so for this, we just wanted to acknowledge that we're evaluating the use of equestrian access here. We haven't really come up with a solution as far as how they get to the site and where they get into the site. And so that's part of the continuing planning effort. And we're hoping, and I think are expecting that the equestrian folks are going to help us and will engage closely with us to identify solutions there.
Thanks.
Sure.
There's also, just quickly, there's some other trails. If you look at the red trails, those were identified as boardwalk portions of a larger walking trail, and then we've identified an access to the Sacramento River. We thought providing an ability for folks to get down there and do some fishing, just viewing the river and being on the river would be helpful. We know there are some informal trails going down to the river now that
people do go down to the river to fish, but they have to be pretty brave souls. It's really thick and dense and steep getting down there.
So I think that's the other part about it too, is to maintain the usability of it, but also the character of what's there now.
Yes.
So like, not just wholesale removing a bunch of stuff. And I could totally see how construction projects would go if you started doing alternative 2 and you start cutting a big trench. That trench all of a sudden is 5 times as wide as you thought it was going to be because you have to remove all the trees to get to the trench.
Yes.
So then you start to make a lot more changes than you really intended. And like you said, it's based on that conceptual recreation features item that's pretty simple. And you're cutting paths that are already there and just maintaining some vegetation control so they don't become overgrown, but it's still natural.
Yes.
So you're not creating this whole use of a park that's not kind of how it is now, but you're creating it, and you're sort of like, you're kind of making it official. Like you're saying that, hey, we want people down here, and we're inviting people down here, and we've put the safety features in place that we need so it's still natural and still effective, but it doesn't totally take away from the character of what that space actually allows you to do, and which is to experience nature literally 500 feet from your house.
Yeah, we really see this as a unique opportunity to provide a passive, open space area for folks to go that the city doesn't currently have, at this scale. I mean, the habitat in here is pretty incredible. When you walk in here, it's a beautiful place, and if there's improved access and really it's sort of a better sense of, we want people in here, we want them in certain areas, and we don't want them going into ponds, obviously, and so creating a plan that provides that sort of openness to people to come and experience this area, I think is what we're trying to achieve.
Thanks for answering all my questions.
Sure.
All right, Commissioner? Commissioner Johns?
One of them is related to the funding. So the grant that exists now is through the Delta Conservancy, right? And
That's correct.
For just a little bit under 600,000.
That's correct.
Do all or any of these alternatives, are they funded entirely by that, or would additional grants need to be pursued?
There would need to be additional grants to actually implement the project. So this covers the planning, the design, engineering, CEQA compliance, stakeholder engagement. And then the idea is by getting to 65% design, you are really well positioned to get additional grant funding. This was from Proposition 1, which is more focused on habitat restoration projects, but the Delta Conservancy now has Prop 68 funding, which is another pot that is more focused on recreational opportunities. And so we see an opportunity there, and there may be other opportunities we could explore to implement this.
Okay. And alternative 3, and forgive me if this is kind of a basic question, but I'm not in the flood world, but does it actually would it provide flood protection at all? I think it's alternative 2 now, or this one?
The alternative 3,
The alternative
and the Riverside Terrace alternative. And that, I would say it really doesn't provide much as far as flood protection benefits. It's a relatively small area. It would hold a little more water during large flow events, but the flows in the Sacramento River are so large that it's really negligible.
You'd just be channeling what already gets flooded during high water times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Parking, so I'm kind of expanding on some of these things that Greg was saying about the usage of the overall area, which I think is fantastic, because that's part of, I think, what we're challenged to do in this commission is to make sure that these things that are coming up to us are usable for as many people as possible within the area, right?
Yes.
And I remember there was a group of equestrian advocates that came by a few months back. And so it's nice to see that part be included as a couple of pathways in here. The idea of honestly conserving, providing some habitat for fish too, I think is a big plus. And the ability to incorporate both what already exists And then, like Greg said, Commissioner Price, excuse me, said you can add on the floodplain channel later.
That's
Which
correct.
would provide the habitat for the salmon, right?
That's correct.
So I think that's a fantastic way to approach this in pursuing the grants. I would like to see the combination of the two, where you can get a recreation-type use of the Bees Lake, the existing Bees Lake area, and then expand what's already kind of getting flooded pretty regularly through the river to provide some sort of conservation for a species that's really kind of dwindling in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons. So I think that's a fantastic way to approach it, where we could kind of piece it out and approach it over time.
Yeah.
The parking area for allowing access to this, there's really only one designated area on this map here. Do you feel that that would be enough to accommodate, horse trailers, plus people who want to do, BMX, which is bicycle motocross, by the way? I didn't know what BMX stood for until, I mean, I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it actually stood for. And they want to, do wildlife observation. Is that area, do you feel that would be enough to kind of house a Saturday at this place?
So we do need to explore that in more detail. We need to kind of figure out how parking would work. Some of the stakeholders have talked about, is there a way you could actually have parking within the Bees Lakes area? Could you have, vehicles come down and park in there? We think that might be difficult because of the elevation change and the quality of the habitat that's in there now. There'd be, mitigation requirements to replace that habitat. And so we're still exploring that issue. We haven't, I think it's something you tapped into, how's this all actually going to work? Some of the discussion was, could you park on the levee? That happens now, but that really contributes to that concern of people dumping, and just a safety concern. The idea is we may have school trips that come out here. We're thinking about educational facilities. There was discussion about maybe having a small little amphitheater in the southern portion where you can have kids come in, hike, and then sit down and have a little lunch and then hike out. And so when we were thinking about that, we were wondering, okay, if you're parking on the levee and vehicles are going by, there's safety concerns there. So it's something we need to keep exploring as part of this effort.
Does the park, sorry, I'm going to jump in on the parking since you talked about that. Is the dash line on the recreational features, the parking area, is that land already between Village Parkway and the setback levee already city land? Or does it need to be acquired? Is that a whole nother conversation?
That's a conversation that Tracy's going to
Yeah, it's not city land yet, it's part of the Liberty development.
Okay.
So at the point in time when Liberty moves forward with construction, there'll be a process where the parkland as the street right-of-way will be transferred to the city.
And that's already a chunk of Liberty that's designed to be park and restroom facility and that stuff?
That is the area that's earmarked for their community park.
That's what I was thinking. It's, so combining some of the park and parking land that's already in that Liberty plan is going to help enhance this. And it's not, I mean, to talk about the parking is looking at, you were asking about the size of it. If you look at the aerial photo, the parking lots for those, the harbor, the marinas, those are pretty big.
Yeah.
So it's like, you just kind of get a scale of how big that is compared to how much parking would be required. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on in that area that's going to be like large groups with, 50 cars. It's not that big. And it's not like it's like a baseball game with, spectators and participants. It's a purely participant park. So, and then a lot of the people who would go to that park, I would think, are bringing their own transportation, whether that's they're riding from home or they're walking, or especially if there's going to be a whole lot of new housing around there, it's going to be an amenity that's a lot of times focused on the people who are already in that part of town, but also inviting for people to come from outside of town, so.
Yeah, you actually get a lot of that activity right now, just joggers doing loop runs through there, cyclists on South River Road. So it's used quite a bit as far as just people coming from the community and accessing it, not just in vehicles.
Yeah, and on this map, it shows the equestrian trail kind of goes all the way through, so you could potentially ride from home where you have your horses and then, right, is that accurate? And then kind of go through the area, explore that a little bit, and then get back on and continue on, right?
Well, also looking at that tan line that runs parallel to the remainder levee South River Road section, that's actually kind of like terraced off, so it's like the South River Road's like the high point of that, and then there's like a step down, and there's like a flat spot that's maybe double track wide that is there, and then below that is the actual tree line part. So you're kind of at the treetop level when you're on the levee, and then you're kind of in between in that, where that tan line is. So, and that's already cleared of trees. So it's like a great place for like a wider trail. And then there's like, as you get trails, you think of like I can fit 2 people side by side. Now I can fit a single line of people. So the trails going through the middle of the park obviously would be smaller, and the ones that are around the perimeter would be larger.
Yeah.
So it looks great.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I guess in summary, I love the approach that you can utilize what's existing now for a limited budget, and then add on potentially, maybe with an additional Delta grant, the idea for salmon habitat. I think that's a great way to approach it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
And thank you for your patience earlier with the other conversation too, so
No worries.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I did want to highlight just as far as the equestrian alignment and continuing to the east and west, but that was something we put on here just so there was some sort of connection, but we really need to talk to the equestrian users to understand if that makes sense. And so we just wanted to make sure we identified something on here to show that we're serious about integrating equestrian into this.
And they are a stakeholder, right? That's one of
Yes.
the stakeholders that was identified? Okay,
Yes.
good.
All right, Commissioner Eckler?
Yeah, I want to echo Commissioner Jans on here. And to the point of even what Commissioner Price went through and said, I mean, I think the onus on getting something done and getting something moving is huge. I mean, this is an area that I have a lot of familiarity with, being around in the area here, and, the water quality there, to your point, it's, to say substandard is probably putting it politely.
Agreed.
Is it really water?
Yeah, no, it's just the big green pit over there, right? But, I mean, the other part of it is too, is I think, the uniqueness of here and to really stack it, if we were to go through and look at it almost as a phased implementation, to go through and say the River Terrace aspect of it phased on in on top of phase 1, right? Or concept 1, sorry. Would be a really interesting element. The density of trees in, the river-facing area, but I mean, it's, to go through there, you might as well bring, some clearing area to go through and even make any of that usable. I mean, it's really, it's really unusable space. So to go and say, from a conceptual standpoint, if we're looking at to go and add a real game changer into the area, to go and say, okay, well, on top of it, now we're conserving the habitat. It would add a uniqueness element to this area that I don't think you could match it with anyone else, to go and say, of the overall area of something that's really is, inefficient, ineffective space right now.
Yeah.
Unless something were to be really done in that area to go and make that space accessible and maintained and doing, and really even another element of that's like, okay, you could, say kayaking, that's one other approach that somebody could really come on in, or, from a beach area as well too, to really go and actually access this in a unique way.
Yeah.
To open up the area. So, I mean, I would love to see, concept 1 with the River Terrace area kind of stacking on top of that, maybe as a later phase. Just to open that up, I think it would be huge.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I mean, one of the things we struggle with, and we did meet with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to evaluate their interest in the River Terrace, and they acknowledge there would be substantial mitigation associated with the vegetation that's in there now. And so that's sort of the balance of, do you create something where you're creating really good salmon habitat, but you're also affecting really dense riparian habitat. to get there. And so there's trade-offs. And so I think the idea of having a second phase that you can look at those issues in more detail and maybe add that on later would make sense.
I think too is looking at that from the lens that we were looking at in November when we saw this before, was we were remembering the previous year that had a really sustained high water level.
Yeah.
And then if you go out there now, the what do you call them, the remainder areas that were in between the levees
Yes.
is still dry.
Yeah.
So it's like, we were looking at it, it's like, man, that thing's just gonna be a flooded mess all the time.
Yeah.
And like you said, you could clear out all the trees and create that river terrace, but it would not be underwater right now. So then it would just be a big, like a big beach that's not getting any, so we removed a bunch of riparian habitat to create salmon habitat that isn't being used.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like a 1 in 4 we were talking about, like one of those remainder areas. I think that's what Mr. Fabian was talking about when we were talking about from Public Works, was saying those really probably are only going to get flooded every couple of years. But, we don't know what the climate's going to do and that, but I mean.
Well, beaches are fun in the summertime.
Oh, yeah, beaches are great. It's a
You're right there by the river.
dirt beach, but.
Yeah.
Well, that comes to be some of the, the more popular areas as well, too, where we really get to open that up. And it's the overall accessibility and enjoyability from all aspects, right? I mean, from the equestrian community here, I mean, we need to go and we need to figure that out. We need to, go through, because they're one of the biggest stakeholders, biggest users of this area right now.
Yeah.
But to go through and say from an overall quality, accessibility, to really turn this into a gem, I think is,
Tracy?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to build off of some of the comments made. At the stakeholder meetings, there was a lot of discussion about the alternatives that also offered fisheries benefits. And when you step back and look at a little bit bigger context, we've actually created multiple areas with our most recent flood improvement project that create fisheries benefits. And so when we looked at the Bees Lakes area, in context of the Southport Levee Flood Project and all the fishery benefits created from those inundation areas, the cost, although we didn't really go into detail in the report about the estimated cost, the cost for the Bees Lakes options to include fishery benefits, that would be relatively small compared to all of the fishery benefit work we've done as part of the flood project, were exponentially increasing the construction project budget. And so for that reason, I think that's why the stakeholders started to lean towards the more minimal concept, because we've already made improvements for fisheries benefits, and we're waiting to kind of see those take hold. And so a future phase in later years might be something we definitely want to consider, but maybe that wasn't as critical right now for this project.
All right, Commissioner Reed?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with everything my colleagues have said. I'm really supportive of the incremental approach, starting with alternative one. I just wanted to point out that, to follow up on Tracy's comments too, this area is a natural area. So, we're dealing with nature here. So it's not like we're going to be able to manage all the outcomes. That if we're letting the ecosystem take care of itself and repopulate with the natural species that belong there in the first place, and removing some of the challenges of the invasive species, it's going to tell us some things over time about how the natural species are going to shape this environment. And so while I'm also very supportive of multiple use and drawing people to the place, we don't want to overpopulate it in a way that's going to destroy the natural benefit that it provides. So I think an incremental approach and making smaller modifications and then letting the environment tell us how those are being received is the way to go. We're not precluding options down the road. And also there may be, insofar as multiple objectives, there may be other locations that better fulfill at a lower cost those objectives than this one. This one, we would like, for me, I would like to see it in its highest and best use as an ecosystem. And so I don't want to burden it with multiple amenities and not respect the ecosystem that we're trying to preserve.
Yeah.
But alternative one, I think, is the way to go. I think that everybody is correct in choosing that as a starting point.
And I would just add quickly, as far as the intent for the recreational components, particularly in the Bees Lakes area, is really to try and identify ways you can keep people on trails and out of more of the natural areas. And then with alternative 3, I don't want to describe the physical changes or exaggerate them, but they're substantial to where we were trying to figure out how would you actually get into the riverside to excavate? And then when you excavate that, really you're providing a habitat for salmon for 2 weeks out of the year. I mean, it inundates for that period and that's about it. Whereas you are removing a lot of that natural vegetation, riverine aquatic habitat that provides benefits as well. And so that is a big leap, and from a cost standpoint, it is a big leap as well. But I think we identified it in here as something that makes sense to look at some future point as an add-on.
If I could just add one thing, I think part of the reason for the idea of using this lower riverside area was because there's just not, I think, as much heavy use or planned use for that section of the river.
Yeah.
So when you add bathrooms and amenities, there could be some concerns for people misusing the area if it's not being developed in the way that the Bees Lake area is.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some lower cost alternatives, recreation uses like, I don't know, like maybe frisbee golf, something that just takes a very easy post and a little trail there that could be used to kind of expand the use of that area if it's not going to be excavated and, something like that. So that way it's the whole area is being used and not just the Bees Lake area.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you referenced frisbee golf. There's actually a pretty strong stakeholder contingent that's interested in that.
Well, it's fun.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, so I mean, I think so when you look at this and you look at the alternatives, I think you see that area is just not being used unless you incorporate alternative 3 and then it has a use to it.
Yeah.
But if it was expanded the way that the Bees Lake area is expanded, then maybe alternative 3 is not as attractive.
Yeah, and I should highlight that we are looking at ways to access the river as part of alternative 1, so the recreational component. So we think there's an opportunity to do that. It's a pretty steep drop-off, and so there's some complexity related to being able to get in there, but we really think there's ways you can provide that recreational access in a controlled way. So, a path to get down to the river and maybe a floating pier or something like that so you could fish off of. The difficulty is the river the height of the river, the stage changes quite a bit over time, and so anything you have to be able to ensure that there's not a lot of operations and maintenance expenses associated with whatever you build. So,
Yeah, I think that's a really, really valid point, and I would echo Commissioner Jans in there, is that if there's something that could be used to incorporate, now just basically kind of south of the yacht club property, there is kind of an open, flat area, even from an accessibility that, may lend itself to go through and do there, I know they've done parking and explored other areas in there, but that may be an area that you can use as an approach. But, to go on to Commissioner John's point, it's like, okay, if we're going to go through and say from a nature, okay, how do we enhance that? How do we go and lean into it a little bit more? But to go and say, okay, well, in that area, okay, now we're going to really look at the accessibility, from, other ways that we can approach it from the riverside, because that's such an asset, right?
Yeah.
And getting down to it, I think that would be a huge enhancement to the park, even from a nature sense, that if we can go and look into that, I think that would be something really, really unique.
yeah.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Brown. We're going to call it, but don't go too far. We have request to address the commission, Mr. Don Schatzel. Would you come up and like to comment on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. It is Don Schatzel, as you said, and I was happy to be on the stakeholder committee. So I appreciate being invited and being involved, and they were very enjoyable meetings. And clearly, this commission has done your homework, because you said a lot of things I was going to say and didn't have to, but then Doug didn't put that design up, and so I thought, no, now I have to say something. So I'm glad you brought it back up. There's a number of things that we're very supportive of the alternatives and restoring the area. Everything you said, where the Horse Club is right there with you. What's expressed in that design there is already happening. And I think I'm just piling on to what you said, but there's already, until recently, been equestrian use. There's already been bicycle use. There's already people that take pictures. There's already people that look at the birds. You know, there's hikers. So that expresses a lot that's already there. What jumps out at us that causes the Horse Club to ask question is the word incremental. What does that mean in your mind? Because to us, it sounds like 20 years from, let's start with alternative one, and maybe if we do it incrementally, we will get to the point where we formalize that which is already happening, but in 20 years. So I hope so the use of the word incremental kind of makes us pause. We've also learned that, and staff responded to this, and so did Doug's group, that if the words are not here in 5 years when we're all gone, it didn't exist. And so they included the word equestrian, so thank you very much, because we've learned, you can say recreation amenity in the meetings and the stakeholders, and today we know recreation amenity, which is in all of the alternatives, includes equestrian, but in 5 years, well, wait a minute, it's not written, they weren't talking about horses. That's how life goes in the world of cities and plannings, and, maybe in 5 years we'll never talk about disc golf, but, we did today. So those are some things that jump out at us, and I guess the final request we have is, depending on the action you take as a commission, as you express it to the city council, if you just show, for example, alternative one doesn't show that. So if there's a way, and maybe this is more structural than anything else, to include alternative one as part of that, then to us, it shows, us meaning the Horse Club, shows the whole picture of where we want to start and the articulation of that which already exists, which would be the final product, okay? And one final, if I can help, the P up there, we're talking about the parking, the proposed sports complex, and you hit it right on the nose. Parking for horse trailers, parking for bicycles, and in fact, at the stakeholders meeting, we talked about the potential of parking there. And you can see the gray road coming back towards the river. Can you use that road for the horses to get up into Bees Lake? And the answer is, of course. We don't need an asphalt road, just put dirt on the side of the road and we're good to go. So we could use that as parking, so could the BMX people, right? And we've gotten along with the BMX people for years. We just go through, horses coming, okay, they stop, or bikes coming, okay, we stop. And we've gotten along for years in a multi-use area. So I hope I helped. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be on the stakeholders committee. They were enjoyable. They had Audubon Society people. They had a really good cross-section of people that were not at all bashful about expressing their opinions about things. It was helpful meetings, and a lot of the alternatives express the input from those meetings, which is really gratifying. If you're going to have a meeting, the map ought to show what the stakeholders say, and Doug and his group did a great job on that. So
I think that's important what you said about the having that conceptual recreation features like written down the way you want it to say, but also include, I guess I made the assumption, and you pointed out maybe it's not right, that conceptual recreation feature was kind of an overlay to all three of the alternatives. So whether you're doing 1, 2, or 3, that map still worked. So now if we're leaning toward alternative 1 is just putting these features and trails and appellations and everything onto that to say this is the leaning toward proposal that we're saying it includes those recreational features. So I think it was great that you said that, because then it just kind of makes everybody aware that, yeah, we do need to make sure this is all integrated together, not two separate ideas.
That's how we read it. It may not have been meant that way, but, it says alternative 1, alternative 2, alternative 3, but then it says conceptual. To us, as sensitive as we are, with equestrian trails and the need to do more, it's like, whoa, what does that mean? Okay.
So yeah, integrating those conceptual recreation features into the alternative plans, especially when you're presenting it to another stakeholder group or another commission or council, is having that all on one document, especially, or having that conceptual recreation feature overlaid onto all 3 alternatives if you're still presenting more alternatives past us.
Okay, good.
All the comments we've had so far from all the commissioners have seen it that way.
Yeah.
With the conceptual on top of alternative number 1. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just one thing, if I might ask, and it may be out of point or not, but Doug, I think Mr. Schatzel had a great point to something as far as what does incremental mean, right? So, is there a way that, as we're exploring this, that we could look at an alternative 1 that may have some expanded, use of conceptual trails around the river area? Because again, I think there's a big sentiment about we want to get things moving, we want to preserve the area, but if that means that we can have agreement, looking at something like conceptual 1 where we can really get into it, it's not a huge cost, but maybe look at it as another alternative that might have, some more trails in that area that really aggregates this and kind of puts this plan in stone and we move ahead, instead of going through and saying, okay, well, that's great, we may look at it one more time later on, but if we were to look and say, okay, well, and we have a alternative 3 that just call it the River Trail Project, right? They go and said, okay, well, this integrates here and it creates an expansion kind of through in that vegetation and go through and make it, less invasive, that we're going to go and tear a bunch of things on out, but, maybe enhances some of the natural features that we no longer have to talk about it as an incremental piece, but one that we can go and say, okay, well, I'll stack hands on it, move ahead.
Yeah, so the way I would look at it is, alternative 1 really is trying to basically make those improvements to the ponds, filling those ponds up, and then doing all the recreational improvements that make sense for the city. And then the other alternatives also assume those same recreational components would be overlaid on top of those alternatives. I think with alternative 3, it gets a little more complicated exactly what you do with recreation when you're really changing the river environment. And so the stakeholders, the input we received from the stakeholders was, make incremental progress, basically try and get moving on something. And I think when they were saying that, they were like, alternative 1 with the recreational features is the first increment. And then maybe implement it as a second phase, alternative 2 or 3. So I think my interpretation was try and get alternative 1 with all those recreational features, including what you would do on the riverside and within the Bees Lakes area, and then at a later date, evaluate 2 or 3 if there's funding opportunities available. And so we really do want to try and make sure we're integrating all that recreation right out of the gate.
Okay.
That's good, because you always assume things, and assuming things is always terrible, because then you don't know what's really in there. I think my assumption was that the conceptual recreation features went along with alternative 1. So I think that's great that we just talked about that enough, where we're now all in agreement that those things go together, and the incremental part would be incrementally adopting other construction that would enhance the water quality stuff, not really as much the recreational stuff, because that stuff kind of works with all 3 plans.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very clear. Commissioner?
I just wanted to clarify, because I think I was the one that actually used the word incremental, and by that I was just meaning from 1 to 2 to 3, as opposed to on the conceptual recreational features, which, like my colleagues, I understood to already be incorporated in alternative one as the first phase.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Oh, I'm not in charge anymore.
Okay, on to, Tracy, did you want to say something? Can we go on to item 6?
I'm the next item. I was
Okay,
just getting ready.
item number 6, consideration of land acquisition located at 1028 Fernwood Street for a future neighborhood park and adoption of resolution 20-70 telling related budget actions.
Thank you, Chair Sandoval, members of the commission. So just a point of clarification, the language, the subject of this actual item on your agenda is correct, although it references a different staff person, it's me. The actual agenda report references language that was used for the report that went to City Council, so that's an error. So this is an update on the land acquisition located at 1028 Fernwood Street. I sent an email out to the commissioners in early January letting you know that after the last commission meeting, we had this unique opportunity to pursue acquisition of a small park in the Westmore Oaks neighborhood for a future potential pocket park, neighborhood park. And everything had to happen very quickly because it was an open market transaction. We went to closed session with City Council. They supported moving forward to negotiate a purchase price. We were successful in doing that and took the item to council in January. They approved acquisition of the property with the conditions that were outlined in the letter of intent that's attached, which basically gives us a 60-day window to conduct due diligence. We're in the process of doing that right now. We have a Phase 1 site assessment underway, but if that comes back, without any major issues, we will move forward and acquire the property. And then at that point, we'll be working through our city mid-year budget review process to just identify immediate improvements or maintenance items that need to be funded. So we know right now that the site does not actually have irrigation. It's a very touching story that neighbors have been caring for this property for decades and have been watering the site on their own. And so the first thing we want to do is make sure that the landscaping that's in place is taken care of. And that will probably involve using a water truck in the short term to go out and water the site a couple of days a week as needed based on the weather. And then we will need to look at installing some irrigation improvements so that we can incorporate that site into our entire city park system irrigation program. And then beyond that, this is actually a great candidate site for future grant funding, the same grant funding that we explored for with Prop 68 for the West Acre Park site, for the Fallbrook campus. This site actually qualifies in both categories for that grant program. It meets the median household income limits, and it also is located in a park poor area. So we're really excited about this opportunity. It's not very often that you get an opportunity to acquire vacant land in an infill area. So we are moving forward, and I expect that right now everything will continue to move forward as planned with an acquisition, but we'll certainly keep you posted. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll say that I thought that was already a park. So making it sort of official, and especially with the implementation of metered water consumption, taking the burden of having the neighbors use their water to water that, and sort of formalizing it instead of being someone else's vacant property that everyone was kind of using as a park already. And then being able to put that in line, like you said, for the multiple levels of grant funding that's available to populate the park with some additional amenities that fall within the guidelines of what you would normally do for a kind of a pocket park, a table, a trash can, irrigation, and leaving it pretty much like it is, without having to do a bunch of stuff to it. You're not having to plant trees. It's adding some, and then coordinating that also with the sort of the sidewalk and curb repairs that are happening in that area, is you're gonna get a lot of that stuff just is gonna happen because we're already doing it. So it's gonna be great. I'm excited about it, and was excited when I saw that email that it was, that was surprising to me because I thought it was already just a park that, like some of the other ones that don't have a name. So then the other excitement part is now someone's going to be able to submit to name the park. So then that's another thing that'll come before us, and we'll get to have conversations with people, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of history that comes out of that.
Yeah, I was stoked when I went through and actually saw the email. I've seen this property for years. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, and the history, even reading afterwards about the neighbors that go and support it and have maintained it, arguably better than even my backyard, right? I mean, it's beautiful. It's really, and the trees that are there. I mean, it would be cool to actually name the park after some of the community members that actually have taken, the stewardship of maintaining this over the years, but to see it come to fruition and actually transform into something that really, becomes a park, right? I mean, it's incredible. I too was super excited to go and see it.
Commissioner Johns?
Just a clarification. So the city submitted a grant application for Prop 68 and then is acquiring this property in hope that receiving the Prop 68 grant funding can help fund a park revitalization project. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, we submitted 3 applications for the Prop 68 grant program for the statewide community park program already. We are waiting to hear back. I'm going to jump ahead to my director's report real quick, just to let you know. We still haven't heard back. We expect to hear, they're telling Aaron by the end of this month. So we should know whether or not we receive grant funding to make improvements to West Acre, to the Fallbrook site, or to the public plaza in the Bridge District. The Fernwood property would not receive grant funding at this time, but it is a site that looks like it would be eligible for future rounds of that same grant program funding when it becomes available, which I anticipate won't take too long because the window for this current Prop 68 process is very short. So all of the projects that are awarded funding have to be completed by March of 2022. That's a very quick turnaround time, which means shortly after that, hopefully they'll receive funding to roll out another round of funding for that same program.
Got it.
So I just spot checked it to make sure that this would be eligible for some grant funding that we already know exists, and it looks like it is a really competitive candidate. So I'm hopeful we will be able to secure grant funding to make improvements to the site in the future.
There's no doubt in my mind that you'll be able to acquire one. Really proud of all of you.
Any other questions? Okay, going on, 7A to General Administration Function Part 2, 7A Director's Report.
Thank you. Well, I did already brief you on the Prop 68 grant applications. I also wanted to share with you that the Memorial Park ribbon cutting event, we are planning right now to host in conjunction with Little League's opening day, which is Saturday, March 14th. We're working on it right now. And also, what you received this evening was a calendar of upcoming events for our department. Now, it does include some activities that other departments may be involved with, but I've been asked a number of times if there was a way to give the commissioners sort of a year-at-a-glance calendar so you can see what types of activities are coming up. This doesn't include everything because we don't have dates for all of our activities, and sometimes there are new activities that pop up. So it's always best to go to our website, westsacfund.org, to check out our calendar. But this will include some information that isn't in the weekly newsletter that the commissioners get. So hopefully this is helpful, so you can input some of these dates into your calendars. And oops, I'm looking at this right now, though, and I see an error in here. So just a heads up, on February 13th, which is a Thursday, we will be having our Barge Canal trail ribbon cutting. So right now it's showing as March 14th on a Saturday. That's not right. The March 14th date should be the Memorial Park ribbon cutting ceremony. So Thursday, February 13th, you'll all be receiving invitations, if you haven't already, for the Barge Canal Trail project, which is a great project. People are already using it, I know, but we're going to kind of have an official opening. So we'll continue to make updates, and every commission meeting will give you an updated version of this, but I just wanted to highlight that this is something we're trying to do to give you more advance notice of some of the events coming up.
And that's February 14th, Thursday?
February 13th.
13th.
February 14th is Friday, so remember that. But February 13th is the Barge Canal Trail ribbon cutting. And then just a couple of other items. The Heritage Oaks Ropes Course project is open now. The ropes course has had a soft opening for a week and a half, and they're still kind of working out some of the bugs with their booking system. If you haven't been to their website, check it out. They're actually getting a lot of business. They're having a lot of large groups book events, and they're getting a lot of season pass holder purchases. So it's a really great opportunity to get out there on the site. The improvements that they've made that are available to the public to use anytime are really nice. And then, of course, there's a fee to use the ropes course, but they are giving West Sacramento residents and locals 20% off. And there's a code online that you can use. And so they're out there grading, getting the parking lot ready. They'll continue to work on completing all of the other on-site improvements. So the parking lot, which we're excited that we'll be hopefully laying conduit for a future electric car charging station as part of a citywide grant and program to install charging stations in places that are really functional for our community members so that they can shop, dine, or play while they're charging. And we'll have a new play area, a new restroom, concession building, so they'll actually be serving coffee there all of the time, so you can charge your car and grab some coffee. And so those are all underway now, and if the weather holds, they should be able to make some really good progress in the next month on completing those. The docks project is also moving forward. We are waiting for a major amendment to our stream bed alteration permit before we can commence any additional work on the land, but we are still working on the floating dock and getting those designs approved so that can be constructed, built, and then shipped in via the river to connect to the improvements. And I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
I think, jumping ahead here, maybe, yeah, kind of in the middle of future agenda and director's report was looking at the ropes course usage as a sort of future, identifying that as being able to kind of come back to us with a little bit of data once you have it, or once they're, because you're going to get their data when they provide the feedback to us, is like you said, how many people are using it, how many local people are using it, how many big groups are using it. I think that's been a lot of the concern that I've heard about it, is like, oh, this is great, but nobody's going to be able to afford it. But then if it's sold out all the time, then people can afford it. So it's looking at, is it really getting used? Who's it getting used by? It's great data to have, and we'd love to hear, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. I have gotten some questions about the pricing. Ropes courses are, they are more expensive recreation features, no matter where you go. That's something that they'll figure out. They set the pricing. We do have the ability to weigh in on waiving fees, because we do generate a $2 per person usage fee. And then their rent is based on either minimum amount or percentage of their gross revenues. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to maximize the amount of revenues we could generate, but they still have to have a viable business model. So they're probably going to adjust their fees over time based on the business, attendance, participation, and feedback from customers. So I would expect the rates to be in flux for a little while. And then the city does have an opportunity to weigh in also, but we're really letting them kind of figure out their business model right now based on our market. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions? General admission function 7B, future item requests, Commissioners? None being noted. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion by Commissioner Eckler, second by Commissioner Reed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, and this meeting is adjourned.